Hello, white people. I want to talk a little bit about this Cascadia subduction zone. I am from the Pacific Northwest, and I have never heard of this fault line until 2016. The New Yorker did an article in it, and then all of a sudden, the military decides that they need to do a drill for this subduction zone. If it's going to move or whatever, it's going to create a massive earthquake. And anytime you have an earthquake in the ocean, it creates a tsunami. Now, we have a lot of earthquakes here on the West Coast. I can't even tell you the last time I felt one. I think maybe 2006 was the last time I remember feeling an earthquake. But that was like a 5.0, so that one's pretty noticeable. And that one lasted at least a good 45 seconds. But if they're the little ones that only last, 15 to 30 seconds, if it's anything less than a 4.0, I really don't even notice it anymore. But anyway, and I also lived through Mount St. Helens. I lived, just maybe about 20 miles south of Mount St. Helens. And so I'm pretty weathered in this whole earthquake business and mountains blowing up. Anyway, so let's talk about this subduction zone. I was a mock victim. I got paid about $12 an hour. And I'm going to add another caveat here, a little side note. If you ever go ahead and do one of these mock victim things, make sure you pull the card so that you're the victim that's the most injured, because there's a whole lot of standing around during these things, and I'm just not the type of person that stands around. So I pick the card of the person, or the victim that's the most injured. That means I get to lay on the ground, and then the nice young men come and they pick me up, and then they put me on a stretcher, and then they leave me for a long time. And guess what I get to do? I get to nap. It's a pretty good deal, and you get paid for it. Like I said, this is good. You get paid to nap. You can't beat that with a stick. And also another piece of advice I'd like to add is when they decoupage the wound on you, I don't remember what this thing is, but it's like decoupage. They put it on you. Don't let them do it too big, because when you got to take it off, it rips off the hair in your arm. And I'm not a real hairy person, but I'm telling you, it hurts when it comes off. And they even put it on my face too. So it smarts really good. Anyway, when I was a mock victim, I never heard about this until 2016, and here I am. And the folks that were doing it, I was in Seaside, Oregon, and the folks doing it were the National Guard from, I can't remember, Alabama, Arkansas. It's all the same to me. You guys all look alike and sound alike from that region of the United States. All really nice people, though, really good people. And it's impressive how fast the National Guard can set up clinics, medical clinics, surgical suites, everything. Absolutely impressive. And I just have to add another little caveat here, because I'm just the queen of caveats today, is that the United States is by far the most sophisticated country on the planet. And we, in this region, we are very organized, and we are absolutely ready for natural disasters. We have so many layers of preparedness in place. I don't even know if the word preparedness is a word, but I just made it up and I thought it sounded pretty good. Anyway, so I don't know what happened here. According to the folks that I talked to who are in the National Guard, they told me to read the article in the New Yorker magazine, and I had never heard about this fault line, never heard about anything going on from it. And then there's this article in the New Yorker magazine, and all of a sudden the military has to deploy and run drills and do all this craziness. It's just really sketchy. And then you find out that this subduction zone, there has not been any sort of activity from this subduction zone since 1700. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, how was this a subduction zone in the first place? And then how do they know it was from 1700? Well, I know, because I watched a few boring lectures from geologists, or whatever they call themselves, these expert people, and they showed pictures of, when you dig in the ground, you can see what's happening. Like you dig up the ground and you dinosaur bones or whatever, and you can tell what they were eating and what kind of plant life was around them. And you know what I'm talking about. You guys were in high school. You had to take science class, right? I can't articulate it because it wasn't my field of study, and I just gave it a cursory listen, because just barely enough to explain it to you, but I'm hoping you understand what I'm talking about. Anyway, so they say that we're about 50 years past due for having this massive earthquake/tsunami. Now, I want you to look at this map at Seattle. Do you see where the Puget Sound is? It's like like a little crack there. south of Vancouver Island, and the water, when there's going to be a tsunami, well, it's going to take out Vancouver Island, and that's going to make me really sad because I know people who live on Vancouver Island, and I love the people on Vancouver Island. They are the nicest people on the planet. Anyway, so it's going to take out Seattle. The water's going to rush in there. It's just going to flood Seattle, just like God cleansed the earth the last time when he flooded the entire planet. It's going to be a really awesome thing. Well, no, not really, because I'm not really into people being harmed. But anyway, let me read to you something that's more coherent than my rambling. The Cascadia Subduction Zone is a 600-mile fault that runs from Northern California up to British Columbia and is about 70 to 100 miles off the Pacific coast shoreline. And I'm about 75 miles inland from the Pacific Ocean. There have been 41 earthquakes in the last 10,000 years within this fault that have occurred as few as 190 years or as much as 1,200 years apart. The last earthquake that occurred in this fault was on January 26, 1700, with an estimate 9.0 magnitude. This earthquake caused the coastline to drop several feet and a tsunami to form and crash into the land. What is most surprising is that evidence for this great earthquake also came from Japan. Japanese historic records indicate that a destructive, distantly produced tsunami struck their coastline on January 26, 1700. By studying the geological records and the flow of the Pacific Ocean, scientists have been able to link the tsunami in Japan with the great earthquake from the Pacific Northwest. Native American legends also support to the timing of this last event. Well, if the Native Americans were to write stuff down, then we would have a more accurate record. All right, and then if you guys have ever been anywhere near a tsunami zone, a few years, gosh, I don't even know how many years ago, I was down on the Oregon coast, and if you ever go down to the Oregon, Washington coast, I don't know about California, but it's really windy. It's just constantly windy, blowing everything around. But when there's going to be a tsunami or there's an earthquake in the ocean, the wind stops, and it is creepy. I remember being down at, I think it was Depot Bay, and the wind stopped, and I kept asking everybody, why don't we have any wind? Well, it's because there was a tsunami.
Time, Kathy? 11. So 14 minutes, 13 minutes later. And that looks like a waterfall coming in there. This is the second biggest one yet. But they're building again. It's like this was far enough offshore, this earthquake, that it made a big tsunami. I think the biggest is going to be like the one in the middle that went both ways.
It's going to hit the docks again.
I do think it is going to hit the docks again. It might push it in under too this time. Look at this.
Get off the dock.
Is it going to catch? Go under again? There it goes. It's going over.
There goes Mariner.
And there, see, they got steel pilings, but this is quite a push on that.
Whoa.
This is the biggest push yet. No.
Whoa. Oh.
There's a guy out there too. Put your life jacket on. Listen to him yell at him. I agree. Get your life jacket on. What are you thinking?
Jacket on, idiot. There's another move.
There are parts of the dock going.
Yeah, there's Di. Needs to put his jacket on.
Yeah, he's doing it now. But that did just rip a metal piling out, I think, or wood piling.
Tore out the dock. We're going to have to rescue him. There's Coast Guard's down there. Getting ready to save him.
Come on, Bruce Aaron, quit messing up here. if the trend goes, and this isn't the last one, the next one's going to be even bigger. It didn't rip out. You know, it's those steel pilings that are making the difference down there.
Yeah. That would have been a disaster without that.
Yes, it would
But
have.
there's no dock there now, so those guys
Well,
are
it's
going to have
there.
to
There, part of it got ripped out. I'm not sure which part.
the walking part.
Yeah, with the middle of it, I guess.
Yeah, those guys are stranded out there. The Coast Guard's going to have to come rescue them.
Well, this part back down here is going to come back up, I think.
Yeah, but behind Mariner there,
Yeah,
that's
I
where
see.
the dock
I can
is.
see some.
I mean, Mariner's stuck there.
There's some fresh wood and it's broken off there. And look at, there goes the.
Oregon has the potential for a 9.0 or more magnitude earthquake caused by the Cascadia subduction zone and a resulting tsunami of up to 100 feet in height that will impact the coastal area. There is an estimated 2 to 4 minutes of shaking or rolling that will be felt along the coastline, with the strength and intensity decreasing the further inland you are. All right, so out here in the Portland area, I think the last earthquake that I can remember, it was in 2006, and it lasted probably about 30 seconds, and I think they said it was a 5.0. Because of the way our structures are made out here, stuff's not going to fall apart unless it's a really intense earthquake. And then before that, I think the previous one was that I recall, I'm sure there's been others, but 1994. Now that one sounded like we were being bombed, and I don't know, do you think there's really earthquakes, or do you think it's the government testing out nuclear bombs underground and trying to tell us that they're earthquakes? I wouldn't be surprised if they were bombs. The Cascadia subduction zone has not produced an earthquake since 1700. And is building up pressure where the Juan de Fuca plate is subsiding underneath the Northern American plate. Currently, scientists are predicting that there is about a 37% chance that a megathrust earthquake of 7.1 plus magnitude in this fault zone will occur in the next 50 years. This event will be felt through the Pacific Northwest. With the current preparedness levels of Oregon, we can anticipate being without service and assistance for at least 2 weeks, if not longer, when the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake occurs. While this will be difficult to overcome, our citizens, businesses, schools, and government and communities as a whole can take steps to get prepared. Take action but now by actively planning and preparing yourself and your community to be ready for 2 weeks for disasters. All right, so here is a Seattle news station talking about the drill that I did back in 2016.
To
Check
figure
it
out
out.
how to manage a record disaster requires the biggest drill in state history.
We had a magnitude 9 earthquake off of our coast.
From the state level down to county and city emergency operations centers, these people are among the first trying to get a handle on what just hit us.
This is a drill. The message is Old Highway 99 at I-5, exit 88.
Old Highway 99 at I-5, mile marker 88.
The bridge out on Yelm Highway is completely collapsed over the freeway there.
And so it begins. The June 2016 exercise known as Cascadia Rising, designed to find out what works and what doesn't. An exercise that involves multiple local, tribal, state, and federal agencies.
Navy, Army, Coast Guard, Marines.
A giant drill involving some 23,000 military and civilian personnel lasting for days.
It's just there's so much more work to be done.
Robert Ezell is the state's emergency management director.
Inculcating the message in our public dialogue, in our society, in our schools, so that the people who live here really truly get it, understand the gravity of the situation, and the need to take care of themselves.
What led to Cascadia Rising was a 2011 study by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Further analysis by the Washington National Guard concluded that 8,440 people will be killed by the initial earthquake and tsunami. 12,114 will be injured. 507,000 buildings, homes, and apartments destroyed or damaged. Over 1.25 million people will need food and water, the same for more than 750,000 pets. Nearly 500,000 people will need emergency shelter.
The worst of the worst would be sometime in the middle of February, where soils are saturated, it's cold, you have a winter storm coming in, you have snow and ice on the ground.
Cascadia Rising was set in June, the weather warmer, but earthquakes aren't tied to the weather. Odds are the quake will come when the weather is a lot less pleasant. Those saturated soils expected to become landslides, blocking roads and wiping out homes, not unlike the 2014 Oso landslide, which killed 43, the deadliest landslide in U.S. history.
Where you really, truly have a massive humanitarian situation where you're trying to take care of people who don't have heat, they don't have water, they don't have food, the things that they need to just basically sustain life. That's what really, really, truly gives me nightmares and keeps me up at night.
Whether it's June or February, the ability for government to respond will simply be overwhelmed.
So I was running sort of the guys that were running the exercise.
Chris Fowler is a general in the Washington National Guard. He's also a captain in the Seattle Police Department.
We would certainly like to see the public understand that preparedness is absolutely critical at their level.
Why? Because Cascadia Rising was about finding flaws and gaps as well as building upon what worked, and there was plenty of both. But the biggest finding was this: where governments have been recommending people be prepared to be on their own for 3 days, simply isn't enough.
What we're recommending is that they have 2 weeks of preparedness for their families.
Because it just became very crystal clear to us in a catastrophic event, it is vastly different from the disasters that we normally experience, the flooding, the wildland fires, or even the Nisqually type of earthquake. The infrastructure was still largely there following those type of events. After a catastrophic event, the infrastructure is going to be severely degraded, if not inoperative.
What you're seeing on this map is the status of roadways, airfields.
It will take several days to get the National Guard in place, backed up by the U.S. military, pouring in personnel and supplies from out of state. We'll need them.
Many of the first responders within that 24 to 72 hour period are just like you are. They're trying to manage their families, they're trying to stabilize their houses, they're trying to understand what their resources are, and then from there they can transition into the first response sort of job.
Task Force, Aviation, Lakota, Shelton.
Emergency management staff.
There's going to be confusion, there's going to be a fog of information until that sort of all clears out, and there will be some redundancies, but the idea of the exercise would be to minimize those and overcome that fog quicker than we might otherwise.
Most of the transportation infrastructure west of I-5 suffers complete or severe damage. Ground transportation to the coast is cut off. The I-5 corridor from Bellingham to Portland suffers severe to moderate damage. 30% of the fire stations, 48% of police stations destroyed or out of commission. More than a third of hospitals on the west side of the state will be unusable, others damaged. Almost half of Western Washington's total hospital capacity lost.
What long-term we're looking at trying to build here in Western Washington is that sense of self-reliance, the sense of the government isn't going to be here to help immediately. We have to be prepared to take care of ourselves for a period of time. It's not if, it's when.
So they learned a lot from this one exercise, which was out of a total of 9 days, but they want to learn more, build on what they learned here, and they're going to do this again in another 4 years to see what more information they can find out to make us that much safer and make us that much more realistic about what their capabilities are going to be.
Northwest FEMA Director Kenneth Murphy said that this natural disaster along the Cascadia subduction zone, a major fault line that runs from Northern California to British Columbia, is set to kill around 13,000 people and injure another 2,500. This has prompted the Cascadia Preparedness Team to draw up urgent plans to prepare for the apocalyptic scenario. Now, the state is promoting a 2-week readiness campaign for people to ready themselves to be self-sufficient for the 2 weeks. Steve Robinson, the president of Cascadia Prepared, said people don't really understand that there will be thousands of bridge failures and there won't be any liquid fuel or electricity or any communication going. Running water may stop, and it may take several days for responders to start helping with rescues and evacuations. Research has shown that this fault line has generated a major earthquake over a magnitude of 7.5 at least 40 times in the past 10,000 years, meaning they occur every 250 years. The last earthquake, which struck 300 years ago, lowered the Oregon coastline by several feet and caused a massive tsunami. It is thus overdue by more than 50 years now. Oh, we don't care what Kate Brown has to say. It's just a piece of garbage. The megaquake is said to first happen by the entire zone giving way, not just some of it. The quake is predicted to last only 4 minutes with a magnitude up to 9.2. When this happens, the northwest edge of our continent will drop as much as 6 feet and rebound 30 to 100 feet west. Wow. Not only will this cause landslides, but some of this will happen beneath the ocean, which will cause an enormous displacement of water. That water will rise into a massive hill and have one side go toward Japan, while the other 70-foot-tall liquid wall goes toward our northwest coast, averaged to come in 15 minutes after the earthquake began. On the northwest coast of America is 70 years past due for a major seismic event. Earthquakes pose a major challenge with more than 143 million Americans living in areas of significant seismic risk across 39 states. The FEMA director for the Northwest, Kenneth Murphy, said that everything west of I-5 will be toast. So I live east of Interstate 5. The area will be completely unrecognizable after everything has subsided. FEMA predicts that around 1 million people will be displaced after the event, and around 2.5 million people will be needing supplies of food and water. They estimate it would take 3 months before the area gets electricity back, another 6 months to fix major highways, and even up to a year to restore sewer systems. Get prepared and be ready for the next rupture of the Cascadia subduction zone. It will become the worst disaster in American history. This is a map of Oregon State. Do you see that green zone? That's almost all the way to Idaho. That's how far inland the tsunami earthquake is going to affect things. And then here's the state of Washington. Do you see how far east? It's up to Spokane. Spokane's on the border of Idaho and Washington. All right, and so here are the earthquakes in Washington in the last year. There's been 451 earthquakes in the last year in Washington State. How about that? And then in Oregon, there's been 257 earthquakes in the past 365 days. Bend in Oregon had a 4.7 earthquake this month. Well, it looks like they're going to have another drill. This one's going to be about June 2022. All right, white people, that's the damage for now. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to your comments below.